The year was 1879, a time when the Arizona Territory was still wild and untamed, where law and order were merely suggestions. In the dusty frontier town of Shadow Rock, a mysterious drifter named Nathan Thorne was about to teach a gang of ruthless bandits why you should never judge a man by his quiet demeanor. What happened next would become a legend whispered in saloons across the West, a tale of how the deadliest gunslinger in the territory brought two rival gangs to their knees. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching Arizona sun beat down on the weathered buildings of Shadow Rock as Nathan Thorne's horse-drawn wagon rolled into town. The frontier settlement, barely visible through the heat waves rising from the desert floor, sat like a mirage between civilization and the Mexican border. Dust devils danced across the main street where Thorne spotted members of a gang lounging outside the general store, their gun belts hanging low and ready. The town seemed to hold its breath as his wagon creaked past the dilapidated storefronts. Signs of neglect were everywhere. Broken windows hastily patched with wooden boards, doors hanging askew on rusted hinges, and the unmistakable silence of a place where honest folk had learned to keep their heads down. As Thorne passed by, the town's undertaker, Ezra Pine, looked up from measuring a fresh pine box and gave him an unsettling smile. "Might be needing more of these soon," Pine muttered, just loud enough for Thorne to hear. The words hung in the air like a prophecy. Thorne noticed how the undertaker's business seemed to be the only one thriving in Shadow Rock, with a row of fresh coffins lined up against his shop wall like soldiers awaiting orders. Thorne guided his wagon toward the only saloon in town, owned by Thomas "Old Tom" Miller. The establishment stood as a testament to better days, its once bright paint now faded by sun and neglect. A weathered sign reading Miller's Place creaked on its hinges, the letters barely legible after years of desert storms. Before entering, Thorne took a moment to observe his surroundings. He counted 6 horses tied up outside, their equipment suggesting their riders weren't the type to earn an honest living. Through the dusty windows, he could make out several men wearing red bandanas, the signature of Maxwell "Red Max" Hawkins's gang. Their reputation had traveled far, tales of their brutality reaching even the remote areas Thorne had passed through. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and tension. At the bar, Hawkins's men were already deep in their cups, despite the early hour. The floorboards creaked under Thorne's boots as he made his way to the bar, each step measured and deliberate. Old Tom stood behind the counter, methodically wiping glasses with a cloth that had seen better days, his eyes darting nervously between Thorne and the gang members. Thorne had chosen Shadow Rock for a reason, though no one would have guessed it from his ordinary appearance. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his manner quiet and unassuming. The only hint of something more lay in his eyes that had seen too much and gave away nothing. His gun belt was well-oiled and worn in a way that spoke of familiarity rather than show, sitting naturally against his hip like it belonged there. The saloon grew quieter as 3 of Hawkins's men took notice of the stranger. The largest of them, a brute with a scarred face and a badly healed broken nose, exchanged knowing looks with his companions. They'd been looking for entertainment, and this stranger had just volunteered. "Ain't seen you round here before," the scarred man drawled, his words slightly slurred from drink. His hand rested casually on his gun belt, a gesture meant to intimidate. "Don't much like strangers in our bar." Thorne didn't respond immediately, instead placing a coin on the counter and nodding to Old Tom for a drink. The bartender's hands trembled slightly as he poured the whiskey, knowing all too well how these situations typically ended in Shadow Rock. The large man moved closer, deliberately bumping into Thorne's shoulder. "Maybe you're hard of hearing, stranger," I said. What happened next would give Shadow Rock its first taste of who Nathan Thorne really was, and why the deadliest men are often the quietest. In the split second before violence erupted, Old Tom ducked behind his bar and the afternoon sun caught the metal of a gun being drawn. The afternoon sun through the saloon windows caught more than just gunmetal. It caught the look of surprise on the scarred man's face, as he realized just how badly he had misjudged the situation. In a motion almost too fast to follow, Thorne's right hand moved with practiced precision. Before anyone could blink, The scarred man's gun was sliding across the wooden floor, kicked away by Thorne's boot, while its owner nursed a badly sprained wrist. The sound of the weapon skittering across the floorboard seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The other two gang members reached for their weapons, but Thorne's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I wouldn't." His words were quiet, yet they carried the weight of experience that made even drunk men pause. His gun hadn't left its holster. He hadn't needed it. Not yet. The late afternoon light filtering through the dusty windows cast long shadows across the room, making the scene feel like a painting frozen in time. The scarred man, clutching his wrist, spat on the floor. His face had turned an ugly shade of red, embarrassment and rage wrestling for control of his features. "You just signed your death warrant, stranger. Do you know who we work for?" "Maxwell Hawkins," Thorne replied calmly, finally taking a sip of his whiskey. The amber liquid caught the light as he raised the glass. "The man who thinks wearing red bandanas makes his boys look like anything other than common thugs." The words hung in the air like gunsmoke after a firefight. Around the room, several patrons quietly moved toward the exits, recognizing the telltale signs of impending violence. Old Tom slowly emerged from behind his bar, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. He'd seen plenty of tough men come through Shadow Rock, but something about this stranger was different. There was an economy to his movements, a stillness that spoke of someone who had learned the hard way that wasted motion could get you killed. The bartender's weathered hands absently polished a glass, a nervous habit he'd developed over years of witnessing similar confrontations. The saloon's bat-wing doors creaked open, the sound drawing every eye in the room. A shaft of sunlight cut through the smoky air and a hush fell over the crowd. Frank the Snake Morrison, Hawkins's feared enforcer, stood framed in the doorway like an actor taking center stage. His reputation preceded him, a man who enjoyed his work too much, who had earned his nickname by how long he made his victims suffer. His black duster was immaculate despite the dusty streets outside, and a silver watch chain gleamed against his vest. "What's all this, then?" Morrison's voice was surprisingly gentle, almost pleasant, making it all the more unsettling. His eyes, cold and calculating, took in the scene. His three men, one nursing an injured wrist, and the quiet stranger who stood at the bar as if he didn't have a care in the world. The enforcer's spurs jingled softly as he stepped fully into the saloon, the sound somehow more menacing than any threat could have been. "Just a misunderstanding about proper saloon etiquette," Thorne replied, not bothering to turn around. He raised his glass slightly. "Care for a drink?" "Old Tom here keeps a decent whiskey." The bottle on the bar between them caught the light, casting amber shadows on the scarred wood. Morrison's laugh was as genuine as fool's gold, echoing off the walls. "You're either brave or stupid, stranger, though in my experience there ain't much difference between the two." He moved further into the saloon, his spurs clicking against the wooden floor in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Each step brought him closer to Thorne like a predator stalking its prey. "What brings you to our little piece of paradise?" "Just passing through," Thorne said, finally turning to face Morrison. The movement was casual, but his eyes never left the enforcer's hands. "Heading south." "South?" Morrison's eyebrows raised slightly as he stopped a few paces away. "Toward Mexico? Interesting timing, considering what's been happening on the border lately." His hand rested casually on his gun belt, thumb brushing the ornate handle of his Colt. The ivory grip was yellowed with age and use, its surface worn smooth by years of similar confrontations. "Lots of opportunities down there for a man with specific talents." The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch, thick enough to cut with a knife. Through the window, Thorne could see more of Hawkins' men gathering outside, drawn by word of the confrontation. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street as they positioned themselves near the entrance. Old Tom had backed away from the bar entirely, positioning himself near the door to his storeroom, his face a mask of barely concealed worry. "I've heard rumors," Morrison continued, taking another step closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. About a man matching your description. A man who left quite a mess in Colorado territory last month. Would you know anything about that? Thorne's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes, a dangerous glint that made Morrison pause mid-step. Colorado's a big place. Thorne replied, his voice as dry as the desert wind. Lots of men passing through. Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That it is. Still, Max would love to hear whatever news you might have from up north. Why don't you come with us? Have a friendly chat. Another time, perhaps, Thorne said, placing his empty glass on the bar with a soft clink. Right now, I need to see about getting my wagon fixed. The words were casual, but there was steel beneath them. Wasn't a request, Morrison said, his pleasant demeanor evaporating like morning dew in the desert sun. Behind Thorne, the other gang members spread out, creating a half-circle of hostile intent. The late afternoon light caught their red bandanas, making them look like they were dipped in blood. What happened next would be talked about in Shadow Rock for years to come. Later, witnesses would disagree on exactly how it went down, but they all remember one thing: how Nathan Thorne moved like lightning in a summer storm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first punch caught Morrison squarely in the jaw before his hand could even touch his gun. Thorne's movement was fluid, practiced, a dance he'd performed too many times before. As Morrison staggered backward, Thorne's boot connected with the knee of the nearest gang member, sending him sprawling into his companions. The sound of breaking furniture filled the air as bodies collided with tables and chairs. Morrison recovered quickly, proving his reputation wasn't just talk. He lunged forward, a knife appearing in his left hand as if conjured from thin air. The blade caught the fading sunlight as it sliced through the space where Thorne's throat had been a split second before. But Thorne wasn't there anymore, having shifted like a shadow in lamplight. Fast, Morrison grunted, a thin smile playing across his face as blood trickled from his split lip. Real fast, but being quick ain't always enough. He gestured slightly with his free hand, and the remaining gang members drew their guns. The air in the saloon grew thick with tension as old Tom ducked back behind his bar, followed by the sound of a shotgun being racked. Now hold on, the bartender called out, his voice shaking slightly. Take it outside if you're gonna... The rest of his words were lost in the chaos that erupted. Thorne moved with impossible speed, using one of Hawkins's men as a shield while simultaneously drawing his revolver. 2 shots rang out in quick succession, and 2 guns went spinning across the floor, their owners clutching bleeding hands. Morrison threw his knife with deadly accuracy, but Thorne had already anticipated the move. He pivoted, letting the blade embed itself in the wooden post behind him. In the same motion, his gun found its way to Morrison's forehead, pressed hard against the skin between his eyes. "Drop them," Thorne commanded, his voice carrying that same quiet authority. The remaining gang members, seeing their leader at gunpoint, hesitated. "I said drop them." "Do as he says," Morrison ordered through gritted teeth, his eyes never leaving Thorne's. One by one, guns clattered to the floor. "You're making a big mistake, stranger. Nobody crosses Max Hawkins and lives to tell about it." The batwing doors creaked again, and a new voice entered the fray. "How fortunate, then, that I'm looking to have a word with Mr. Hawkins myself." Victor Blackwood stepped into the saloon, flanked by 2 men wearing black bandanas. The rival gang leader cut an imposing figure in his tailored suit, more businessman than bandit. "I must say, this is quite the entertaining show you've put on, Mr. Thorne," came the reply, gun still steady against Morrison's forehead. "Nathan Thorne." Blackwood's smile was practiced, diplomatic. "Mr. Thorne, I couldn't help but notice your, efficient handling of this situation. We could use a man of your talents in our organization." He adjusted his silk vest, a gesture that seemed out of place in the dusty saloon. The pay would be substantial, of course. Through the windows, more men in black bandanas could be seen taking up positions outside. The power dynamic in the room shifted like desert sand in a windstorm. Morrison's jaw clenched, but he remained perfectly still, aware of the cold steel against his skin. "Appreciate the offer," Thorne replied, his attention split between Morrison and the newcomers. "But I work alone." "For now, perhaps," Blackwood said smoothly. "But in Shadow Rock, Mr. Thorne, neutrality is a luxury few can afford. Sooner or later, everyone must choose a side." He gestured at the scene before him. "It seems you've already made enemies of Hawkins's men. Why not make some friends to balance the scales?" Old Tom emerged from behind his bar, shotgun still at the ready. "Whatever you folks are going to do," he said, his voice stronger now, "take it outside. I've already lost enough furniture for one day." Thorne nodded almost imperceptibly. "Your men," he said to Morrison, "are going to walk out first. Nice and easy. Then you'll follow. Any sudden moves, and you won't need to worry about what Hawkins will say about this." "And my men?" Blackwood inquired, raising an eyebrow. "They stay right where they are," Thorne replied, "until this is finished." One by one, Hawkins's men backed out of the saloon, helping their injured companions. Morrison, his face a mask of barely contained rage, followed them out under the unwavering aim of Thorne's revolver. As they mounted their horses and rode off in the direction of their boss's compound, Morrison called back over his shoulder, "This ain't over, Thorne." "Not by a long shot." Blackwood watched them go, then turned back to Thorne with renewed interest. "I must say, Mr. Thorne, you've managed to make quite an impression in just one afternoon. Not many men can say they've faced down Frank Morrison and lived to tell about it." Thorne holstered his gun with the same fluid grace he'd shown in drawing it. "Day's not over yet." He turned to Old Tom. "Sorry about the mess." The bartender waved off the apology, already beginning to right the overturned furniture. "Seen worse, though I got a feeling things are about to get a lot more interesting in Shadow Rock." He didn't know how right he was. As the dust settled in Miller's place, Blackwood's men took up positions around the saloon, while their boss made himself comfortable at one of the few tables that hadn't been overturned in the fight. He gestured to an empty chair across from him, his manner that of a man used to having his invitations accepted. "Join me, Mr. Thorne. I believe we have matters to discuss." Blackwood pulled out a silver cigarette case, offering one to Thorne before lighting his own with a match struck against the table's surface. "It's not often we see someone of your caliber in Shadow Rock." Thorne remained standing, his eyes constantly moving between Blackwood, his men, and the windows overlooking the street. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the saloon floor, and in the distance, he could hear the sound of horses galloping toward Hawkins' compound. "Nothing to discuss," Thorne replied, though he knew it wasn't that simple. Never was in towns like this. "Like I said, I'm just passing through." Blackwood exhaled a stream of smoke that curled lazily in the air between them. "Passing through?" "With respect, Mr. Thorne, men like you don't just pass through places like Shadow Rock. Not with timing like this." He paused, studying Thorne's face for any reaction, especially not when there's a shipment of Confederate gold about to move through our territory. Old Tom, who had been sweeping up broken glass nearby, nearly dropped his broom. Even Blackwood's men turned to look at their boss, surprised by his openness. The revelation hung in the air like gun smoke after a firefight. "That's quite a story," Thorne said carefully, his expression unchanged. "Not a story, Mr. Thorne. A fact." Blackwood tapped his cigarette on the table's edge. 3 days from now, a shipment of gold that's been hidden since the war will be moving through Shadow Rock. Hawkins knows about it. That's why his enforcer Morrison was so interested in your arrival. They're nervous about new players in town. Just then, the saloon's doors swung open again. Isabel Belle Martinez stepped inside, her presence commanding attention like a queen entering her court. She wore a dark riding dress, and a small derringer was visibly holstered at her hip. The way Blackwood's men straightened up at her arrival spoke volumes about her position in their organization. "Victor," she said, nodding to Blackwood before turning her attention to Thorne. "So this is the man everyone's talking about." Her accent carried hints of both Mexico and finishing schools back east, a combination as intriguing as it was unexpected. "Isabel," Blackwood acknowledged, gesturing to another chair. "Perfect timing. Mr. Thorne here was just about to tell us his plans regarding our upcoming business opportunity." "Was I?" Thorne asked, though his attention had shifted slightly since Belle's arrival. There was something in her eyes, a carefully hidden desperation that didn't match her confident demeanor. "A man of your skills could write his own ticket in Shadow Rock," Belle said, taking the offered seat. "Especially now that you've made an enemy of Hawkins' crew. They don't forget easily, and they certainly don't forgive." Old Tom moved behind his bar, pointedly keeping his shotgun within reach. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Blackwood, but maybe this ain't the best place for such a delicate conversation." "On the contrary," Blackwood replied, "this is exactly the right place. Neutral ground, as it were." He turned back to Thorne. "The gold shipment is going to spark a war in Shadow Rock. Hawkins thinks he can take it all for himself, but he's wrong. With your help, we could—" "Not interested." Thorne cut him off, though his eyes lingered on Belle for a moment longer than necessary. "Your war, your gold. None of it concerns me." Belle laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Everything in Shadow Rock concerns everyone in Shadow Rock, Mr. Thorne. Even temporary visitors." She stood, smoothing her dress. "Especially after that display with Morrison. You've already chosen a side, whether you meant to or not." As if to emphasize her point, the sound of distant gunfire echoed from the direction of Hawkins's compound. Blackwood's men tensed, hands moving to their weapons, but their boss remained perfectly calm. "Ah," Blackwood said, stubbing out his cigarette. "That would be Hawkins expressing his displeasure. I'd give it about an hour before his men return in force." He stood, adjusting his vest again. "You have until then to decide, Mr. Thorne. Join us, or try your luck alone against whatever Hawkins sends your way." "There are other options," Belle added quietly, her eyes meeting Thorne's with an intensity that suggested layers of unspoken meaning. Thorne said nothing, but his hand had moved closer to his gun as the gunfire continued in the distance. Blackwood nodded to his men, and they began filing out of the saloon, taking up positions along the street outside. "Think it over, Mr. Thorne," Blackwood said as he headed for the door. "But don't think too long. In Shadow Rock, hesitation has a way of becoming fatal." He paused at the threshold. "Belle, show our new friend to the hotel. Make sure he's properly accommodated." As Blackwood left, Belle lingered, watching Thorne with an unreadable expression. "Well, Mr. Thorne, shall we find you somewhere more comfortable to consider your options?" The sun had nearly set now, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere in the gathering darkness, Hawkins's men were preparing their response to the afternoon events. Time was running out, and Nathan Thorne had decisions to make. As Belle led Thorne down Shadow Rock's main street, the evening air grew thick with tension. Townsfolk hurried to close their shops and shutter their windows like animals sensing an approaching storm. The hotel she guided him to was a 3-story building that had once been the pride of Shadow Rock. Now its faded grandeur served as just another reminder of better days. "You don't strike me as Blackwood's usual type of associate," Thorne said as they climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor. The comment earned him a sharp glance from Belle, her dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. "And what type would that be, Mr. Thorne?" Her hand rested casually on the derringer at her hip. "The kind that follows orders without question? Or perhaps the kind that's only in it for the money?" "The kind that's here by choice," he replied quietly. Belle's step faltered for just a moment, barely noticeable, but enough to confirm his suspicion. At the end of the hallway, she unlocked a door to reveal a spacious corner room. 2 windows offered clear views of both the main street and the side alley, a tactical advantage that wasn't lost on Thorne. Inside, A bed, writing desk, and washstand comprised the sparse furnishings. Your accommodations, courtesy of Mr. Blackwood. Belle closed the door behind them but didn't immediately leave. Instead, she moved to one of the windows, watching the street below where Blackwood's men had taken up positions. You're right, you know. About choices. Thorne checked both windows himself, noting possible escape routes and lines of sight. Want to tell me what's really going on here? Belle was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the pattern on her Derringer's handle. That gold shipment Blackwood mentioned? It's real, but it's not Confederate gold. It's Mexican. Blood money that Hawkins stole from my family 3 years ago. And Blackwood promised to help you get it back, Thorne surmised, watching her reflection in the window glass. In exchange for certain considerations. Her voice hardened. My father was a banker in Sonora. Hawkins and his men killed him, took everything we had. I tracked them here. But... She turned to face Thorne. Blackwood's hold on me isn't much different from Hawkins' methods, just more civilized on the surface. The distant sound of hooves on packed earth drew their attention. Through the window they could see a group of riders approaching from the direction of Hawkins's compound, Morrison at the lead, with at least a dozen men behind him. They're early, Belle observed, her hand tightening on her Derringer. Morrison must be more angry than we thought. Or more scared, Thorne replied, his voice thoughtful. Men like that, fear makes them dangerous. Below, Morrison and his men spread out along the street. Several took up positions on nearby rooftops while others disappeared down alleyways. The setup was professional, methodical. This wasn't just about revenge for the afternoon's humiliation. They're not just here for me, Thorne said, piecing it together. This is about gold. They think I'm working with Blackwood already. Belle moved away from the window, closer to Thorne. You could be. Work with me, not Blackwood. Help me get back what's mine, and I'll make it worth your while. There was a desperation in her voice now, carefully hidden but present nonetheless. And Blackwood? Let me worry about him, she said, her hand moving to rest on Thorne's arm. I've learned to handle men like Victor Blackwood. Before Thorne could respond, a voice boomed from the street below. Morrison's voice, carrying clearly in the evening air. Thorne, get your ass down here and face me properly. Or are you hiding behind a woman's skirts now? Belle's grip on Thorne's arm tightened. Don't. It's a trap. Morrison never fights fair. He's got at least 3 men with clear shots at the hotel entrance. I know, Thorne replied calmly, gently removing her hand. Just like I know you've got a Derringer pointed at my back right now. Belle's sharp intake of breath confirmed his suspicion. How did you... The way you kept your right hand hidden when you moved behind me. The slight change in your breathing. He turned to face her, expression unchanging even as she kept the Derringer leveled at his chest. Want to tell me who you're really working for? A complex mix of emotions crossed Belle's face. Respect, frustration, and something else, something harder to read. You're good, Mr. Thorne. Better than they said. She didn't lower the Derringer. But right now, that might not be good enough. Morrison has men on every roof and Blackwood's watching your every move. One way or another, you're going to have to choose a side. Outside, Morrison's voice rang out again, accompanied by the sound of a rifle being cocked. Last chance, Thorne. Don't make me come up there and get you. Thorne's eyes never left Belle's. Who says I haven't chosen already? The tension in the hotel room crackled like static before a lightning strike. Belle's Derringer remained steady, aimed at Thorne's chest, but uncertainty had crept into her expression. Below, Morrison's men were growing restless, their boots scraping against the packed earth of the street as they waited for their leader's command. You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Thorne, Belle said, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever you think you know. I know the gold shipment isn't from the Confederacy or Mexico, Thorne cut her off, his voice still maddeningly calm. I know it's coming from the Territorial Bank in Tucson, and I know both Hawkins and Blackwood plan to hit it when it passes through Shadow Rock. He took a step closer despite the gun. What I don't know is who you really are, Belle, if that's even your name. A flicker of something, respect perhaps or concern, crossed her face. You've done your homework, Mr. Thorne, but you're still missing pieces of the puzzle. Then enlighten me, he replied, taking another step. The derringer was now pressed directly against his chest. Before Morrison loses what little patience he has left. As if on cue, a shot rang out from the street below, the bullet splintering the window frame inches from Thorne's head. Belle didn't flinch, but her grip on the derringer tightened. You want the truth? She asked, her accent slipping slightly. I'm not working for Blackwood or Hawkins. I'm with the Pinkerton Detective Agency. We've been tracking this gold shipment since Tucson, knowing both gangs would make their move here. Her eyes searched his face for a reaction. And you, Mr. Thorne, have complicated everything by showing up unannounced. Thorne's expression remained unreadable. Have I? Don't play coy, Belle snapped, though her voice remained low. Nathan Thorne, if that's really your name. Appearing out of nowhere with skills like yours, both gangs wanting to recruit you immediately. You're either working for someone else, or you're here for the gold yourself. Another shot cracked through the evening air, followed by Morrison's voice. That's it. Boys, get up there and bring him down. The sound of boots on the hotel's wooden stairs echoed up to them. Belle's eyes darted to the door, then back to Thorne. We're out of time. Make your choice. Already made it, Thorne replied. In one fluid motion, his hand shot out, faster than Belle could react. But instead of going for her gun, he reached past her, grabbing something from the shadows behind her. There was a grunt of pain, and a man emerged from the darkness near the washstand, clutching a bleeding nose. Sloppy work, Roberts, Thorne said to the hidden man. I could hear you breathing from across the room. Belle's eyes widened in recognition. You know him? Should, Thorne replied, disarming the stunned man with practiced ease. He's been my partner at the agency for 3 years. Understanding dawned on Belle's face as she finally lowered her derringer. You're Pinkerton, too. Senior agent, Western Division, Thorne confirmed, keeping his voice low as footsteps thundered up the stairs. Been tracking a leak in the Tucson office, someone who's been feeding information to both Hawkins and Blackwood about gold shipments. His eyes fixed meaningfully on Roberts, who had slumped against the wall. It wasn't just about the money, Roberts spat, blood still trickling from his nose. These shipments, they're bleeding the territory dry. The small ranchers, the farmers, they're all suffering while the banks get richer. So you decided to help 2 gangs of murderers instead? Belle's voice dripped with disgust. How many innocent people have died because of the information you sold? The footsteps were at the end of the hall now. Thorne moved quickly to the door, positioning himself beside it. We'll discuss morality later. Right now we need to deal with Morrison and his men, then Blackwood. He looked at Belle. I assume you have a plan. Had one, she replied, moving to the other side of the door. Before you showed up and started improvising. Plans change, Thorne said, drawing his revolver. Roberts, on your feet. You're about to help us send a message to both gangs. The door burst open, and Morrison's men poured in, guns drawn. What they found was Roberts, standing alone in the middle of the room, his hands raised. Evening, gentlemen, Roberts said, trying to smile through his bloodied nose. Fancy meeting you here. Tew. Before any of Morrison's men could react, Thorne and Belle struck from their positions beside the door. The fight was brief, brutal, and nearly silent. When it was over, 4 of Morrison's men lay unconscious on the floor, while Roberts found himself staring down the barrels of both Thorne's revolver and Belle's derringer. Now then, Thorne said, his voice carrying that same quiet authority that had given Morrison pause in the saloon. Roberts is going to walk downstairs and deliver a message to our friend Morrison. Then we're going to have a long talk with Mr. Blackwood about his plans for the gold shipment. He glanced at Belle. Unless you have a better idea. Belle's smile was sharp as a knife's edge. Actually, I do. But you're not going to like it. You're right, Thorne said after hearing Belle's plan. I don't like it. The hotel room had grown darker as evening settled in, the only light coming from an oil lamp and the occasional muzzle flash from the street below, where Morrison's men were growing increasingly impatient. Belle secured Roberts to a chair with his own belt, checking the bindings twice. It'll work. Morrison's already suspicious of Blackwood's involvement in the gold shipment. All we need to do is turn that suspicion into certainty. By using me as bait, Thorne observed, his tone neutral. He moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight while surveying the street below. Morrison had pulled his men back into the shadows, but their presence was betrayed by the occasional glint of moonlight on gun barrels. You've already got their attention, Belle pointed out, joining him at the window. Morrison thinks you're working for Blackwood, and Blackwood thinks he can buy your loyalty. We can use that. Roberts laughed bitterly from his chair. You're both fools. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Hawkins and Blackwood. They're just the surface. The real power in Shadow Rock runs deeper than you know. Thorne turned to study their prisoner. Then enlighten us. Who's really behind all this? Why don't you ask your partner here? Roberts jerked his head toward Belle. Ask her about Judge Harrison and the Territorial Bank. Ask her about why a Pinkerton agent is really in Shadow Rock. Belle's hand moved to her derringer, but Thorne caught her wrist. He's trying to buy time, he said quietly. Morrison won't wait much longer. As if to prove his point, another shot rang out, this one shattering the window and sending glass shards scattering across the floor. Belle and Thorne ducked instinctively, taking cover on either side of the window frame. Time to decide, Belle said, releasing the safety on her derringer. Are we doing this my way? Thorne's eyes met hers in the dim light. Your plan puts you at as much risk as me. If either gang realizes you're Pinkerton, that's my problem to worry about. She cut him off. Right now, we need to get down there before Morrison decides to burn the whole hotel down. You know he's capable of it. Robert stirred in his chair. You go down there. You're both dead. Morrison's not acting on his own anymore. The judge... Enough! Thorne interrupted sharply. He moved to Roberts, checking his bindings one final time. You're going to sit here quietly and think about how to make your testimony to the territorial marshal more convincing. Belle had already moved to the door, pressing her ear against it. Hallway's clear. They've pulled everyone back to the street. She turned to Thorne. Ready? Thorne nodded, but his expression was troubled. One thing first. Roberts mentioned the judge. If Harrison is involved, he is, Belle confirmed, her voice hardening. But that's not our primary concern right now. We get the gangs to destroy each other, gather the evidence we need, and then we deal with Harrison. One problem at a time. Your father, Thorne said quietly. The story about Hawkins killing him. Was any of it true? A complex emotion flickered across Belle's face. Parts of it. Enough to make it convincing. She met his gaze steadily. Does it matter? Suppose not, Thorne replied, drawing his revolver. But when this is over, we're going to have a long talk about what really brought you to Shadow Rock. Belle's smile didn't reach her eyes. If we survive the next hour, Mr. Thorne, I'll tell you everything you want to know. They moved into the hallway, staying low and close to the walls. The hotel's wooden floors creaked treacherously beneath their feet, but the sound was masked by the increasing commotion from the street. Morrison's voice carried up to them, ordering his men into new positions. Remember, Belle whispered as they reached the top of the stairs. Make it look convincing? Morrison needs to believe you're betraying Blackwood, and Blackwood needs to think you're playing both sides. And the judge? Thorne asked, his voice equally low. Let him think whatever he wants. The more confused things get, the better our chances of exposing the whole operation. They paused at the landing, listening to the movement of boots below. The hotel's entrance was likely covered by multiple shooters, and the back door would be watched as well. One last thing, Thorne said, turning to Belle. If this goes wrong, it won't, she interrupted firmly. But if it does, I've got men positioned at Miller's place and the livery stable. They'll move in if things get out of hand. Thorne nodded, then surprised her by reaching out and adjusting the angle of her derringer slightly. Keep it pointed lower. More believable if you're supposedly my prisoner. Bell raised an eyebrow. Any other professional advice? Just one thing, he replied, his voice dropping even lower. Whatever happens down there, whatever I say or do, trust that I know what I'm doing. I always do, Nathan, she whispered, using his first name for the first time. That's why they sent me to find you. The descent down the hotel stairs felt like walking into a trap, which Thorne reflected grimly was exactly what they were doing. Each step brought them closer to the street where Morrison and his men waited in the gathering darkness. Belle played her part perfectly, stumbling slightly as if being forced forward at gunpoint. As they emerged through the hotel's front doors, the street fell eerily silent. Morrison stepped out of the shadows, his men materializing behind him like ghosts in the twilight. The enforcer's face was illuminated by the glow of his cigarette, the ember burning bright as he took a long drag. Well, well, Morrison drawled, exhaling smoke. Looks like you found some company up there, Thorne. His eyes flickered to Bell, then back to Thorne. Interesting choice of hostage. Blackwood won't take kindly to you manhandling his woman. Thorne kept his gun trained on Bell, his voice carrying across the empty street. She's worth more alive than dead. To all of us. He pushed Bell forward slightly, maintaining the charade. Especially given what she just told me about the gold shipment. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. That so? He took another drag from his cigarette, the glow illuminating the fresh bruise on his jaw from their earlier encounter. And what exactly did the lady share? Everything, Thorne replied. About how Blackwood's been playing both sides. About his deal with Judge Harrison. About how the gold's already been moved up to tomorrow night instead of 3 days from now. The cigarette fell from Morrison's lips, sparks scattering in the dust at his feet. Around him, his men exchanged uneasy glances. The mention of the judge's name had struck a nerve. You're lying, Morrison said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. Tell him, Thorne commanded, nudging Bell with his gun. Bell's performance was flawless, her voice trembling with just the right amount of fear and defiance. It's true. Victor's been planning it for weeks. The judge helped arrange the new schedule. They're going to hit the shipment at Shadow Pass, then frame Hawkins' gang for the robbery. Morrison's hand moved to his gun, but he didn't draw. Why you telling me this, Thorne? What's your angle? Simple, Thorne replied. I want my cut of that gold, and I don't much care who I get it from. Blackwood made me an offer, now I'm making you one. The street had grown darker, but Thorne could make out shapes moving in the shadows behind Morrison's men. Blackwood's people no doubt drawn by the confrontation. The plan was working, perhaps too well. Interesting proposition, a new voice called out. Victor Blackwood emerged from an alley, his men spreading out behind him. Unlike Morrison's rough crew, Blackwood's men moved with military precision, taking up tactical positions along the street. Though I'm disappointed, Mr. Thorne. I thought we had an understanding. Bell stiffened in Thorne's grip, playing her part. Victor, Quiet, my dear. Blackwood cut her off, his tone gentle but firm. The men are talking business. He turned his attention back to Thorne. I offered you a generous partnership. Instead, you choose to bargain with Mr. Hawkins's attack dog. Business is business, Thorne replied coldly. Best offer wins. Morrison spat in the dust. Enough talk. Hand over the woman, Thorne. Then maybe we can discuss terms. Nobody's discussing anything, Blackwood interrupted. Mr. Thorne made his choice. Unfortunately for him, it was the wrong one. The sound of multiple guns being cocked echoed off the buildings. Both gangs had their weapons drawn now, the street transformed into a powder keg waiting for a spark. Think carefully, gentlemen, Thorne said. his voice carrying that same quiet authority that had served him so well in the saloon. "There's enough gold in that shipment to make everyone here rich. Or we can kill each other and let the judge keep it all for himself." At the mention of Harrison again, both Morrison and Blackwood's expressions darkened. The tension in the street ratcheted up another notch. "The judge," Morrison growled. "You seem to know an awful lot about his involvement, Thorne. Makes me wonder who you really are." "Does it matter?" Thorne asked. "What matters is what happens next. We can stand here pointing guns at each other while the real money slips away, or we can come to an arrangement." Belle chose that moment to make her move exactly as planned. She drove her elbow back toward Thorne's ribs, creating just enough space to spin away from his grasp. The derringer appeared in her hand, aimed at Thorne's head. "Or," she said, her voice ringing clear in the night air, "we can end this right now." The street erupted in confusion as both gangs tried to track multiple threats at once. Morrison's men had their guns on Belle, while Blackwood's crew kept their weapons trained on Thorne. In the chaos, no one noticed the small figure watching from the hotel's second-floor window, Roberts, who had managed to work one hand free from his bindings. The tension in the street had reached a breaking point, guns trained in every direction, fingers hovering over triggers, each man waiting for the spark that would ignite the powder keg. Belle's derringer remained steady, aimed at Thorne's head, while both gang leaders assessed this new development with calculating eyes. "Well," Blackwood said, breaking the silence with a slow smile, "it seems my faith in you wasn't misplaced after all, my dear." He took a step forward, his polished boots clicking against the packed earth. "Though I admit, I'm curious why you waited so long to make your move." Belle's reply was cut short by the sound of a horse approaching at full gallop. All heads turned as one of Hawkins's men rode into town, his horse lathered with sweat. He reined up hard beside Morrison, leaning down to whisper something in the enforcer's ear. Morrison's face darkened like a thundercloud. "You sure?" he demanded. The rider nodded grimly. "Problem?" Blackwood inquired, his tone pleasant, but his hand never straying far from his gun. "Seems our friend Thorne here isn't the only one playing both sides," Morrison growled. "Boys just spotted Judge Harrison leaving your compound, Victor." "Had quite an interesting conversation with him, did you?" The atmosphere shifted again, alliances realigning like desert sands in a windstorm. Belle's derringer wavered slightly, her eyes darting between the gang leaders. "Business is business," Blackwood replied, echoing Thorne's earlier words. "The judge has his uses." "Like helping you move up the gold shipment?" Morrison's voice carried the promise of violence. "Planning to cut us out entirely, were you?" Above them, unseen, Roberts had worked his other hand free and was now moving silently toward the hotel's back stairs. The clouded moon cast just enough light for him to make out the shapes of additional men, taking up positions on nearby rooftops, men who weren't with either gang. Back on the street, Thorne spoke up. "Interesting how quick you both are to suspect each other," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Almost like someone's been playing you against each other from the start." "Meaning what exactly?" Blackwood demanded. "Meaning the judge isn't working with either of you," Belle answered, her derringer still aimed at Thorne, but her eyes now fixed on Blackwood. "He's playing both sides, waiting for you to destroy each other. Then he keeps the gold for himself." Morrison's laugh was harsh in the night air. "And I suppose you learned all this while Thorne here had you at gunpoint?" "No," came a new voice from the shadows. "She learned it long before that." Sheriff James Holbrook stepped into the street, his badge catching the dim moonlight. Behind him, more figures emerged from the darkness, uniformed men wearing U.S. Marshal badges. "Evening, gentlemen," Holbrook said, his usually timid demeanor replaced by something harder. "Hope we're not interrupting anything." "James," Blackwood said smoothly, though his men had tensed visibly. "This is a private business discussion." "Not anymore. It's not." The sheriff's voice carried unexpected authority. "Judge Harrison's been arrested in Tucson, his conspirators too. It's over." The revelation hit both gangs like a physical blow. Morrison's men looked to their leader for direction, while Blackwood's crew began slowly spreading out, taking defensive positions. "You're lying," Morrison snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Holbrook replied. He reached into his vest and pulled out a telegram. "Got this an hour ago. The judge's clerk told them everything about how Harrison's been manipulating both gangs, feeding information through Roberts here." At the mention of his name, Roberts froze on the hotel's back stairs. He hadn't made it halfway down. "Roberts?" Morrison's face contorted with rage. "The Pinkerton man?" "Former Pinkerton," Belle corrected, finally lowering her derringer. "He's been working for Harrison for months, helping him orchestrate everything, the gold shipments, the gang warfare, all of it." Thorne's voice carried across the suddenly silent street. The judge needed both gangs to destroy each other, made it easier for him to maintain control of the territory while lining his own pockets. The sound of multiple horses approaching drew everyone's attention. From both ends of the street came the thunder of hooves as more marshals appeared, their rifles gleaming in the moonlight. Morrison looked at his men, then back at the approaching lawmen, his face twisted into a bitter smile. "Always knew this town wasn't big enough for both gangs," he said, then turned to Blackwood. "Guess it ain't big enough for either of us anymore?" The street had become a chessboard, with every piece now in play. Morrison's men on one side, Blackwood's on the other, with the marshals closing in from both ends. In the tense silence, the sound of Robert's boots on the hotel's back stairs echoed like gunshots. "Don't!" Thorne called out, not turning around. "You're only making it worse for yourself, Roberts." The footsteps stopped. Then suddenly, Robert's voice rang out from the darkness. "You don't understand. None of you do. The judge was trying to bring order to this territory. Real order, not this chaos." Belle's derringer shifted smoothly to cover the stairs. "By setting two gangs against each other? By stealing gold meant for honest settlers? That's not order, Roberts. That's just another kind of tyranny. Better his tyranny than their barbarism." "Tackar er tider." The sound of a gun being cocked echoed from the shadows. "You've ruined everything, Thorne. You and your damn moral code." Blackwood's smooth voice cut through the tension. "As fascinating as this drama is, gentlemen, I believe we have more pressing matters to discuss." His hand rested casually on his gun belt. "Such as how we're all going to walk away from this situation." "Ain't nobody walking away," Morrison growled. "Not after what you pulled with the judge." Sheriff Holbrook stepped forward, his badge catching the moonlight again. "Actually, gentlemen, I'm offering you all a chance to walk away. Those who surrender now will be guaranteed fair trials. Those who don't." He let the implications hang in the air. A bitter laugh erupted from the stairs. "Fair trials? With Harrison arrested? There's nothing fair about any of this." Roberts's voice had taken on a desperate edge. The gold was meant to fund something bigger, something that would have changed everything in the territory. "Change it for who?" Thorne asked quietly, finally turning to face the stairs. Roberts stood halfway down, his gun trembling in his hand. "For the people or for men like Harrison who think they know what's best for everyone." The night air grew thick with tension. As more marshals appeared on the rooftops, their rifles trained on the street below. Morrison's men began to shift nervously, while Blackwood's crew maintained their disciplined positions. "Last chance," Holbrook announced. "Surrender your weapons now or—" The crack of a gunshot cut through the night air. Roberts had fired, not at Thorne or Belle, but at Morrison. The enforcer staggered, clutching his shoulder, and chaos erupted. Guns blazed from every direction. Morrison's men opened fire on Blackwood's crew, who returned fire with military precision. The marshals began shooting as well, trying to contain the violence while avoiding civilian casualties. Through the chaos, Thorne moved like a shadow. He tackled Belle behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood around them. "Still think this plan of yours is working?" he shouted over the gunfire. "More or less," she replied, returning fire with her derringer. "Though, I admit, the timing could have been better." Across the street, Morrison had taken cover behind a wagon, blood seeping through his fingers as he barked orders to his remaining men. Blackwood had disappeared into the alley, his men providing covering fire as they executed a disciplined retreat. Robert's voice could still be heard from the hotel stairs, shouting about justice and order, but his words were increasingly drowned out by the sound of gunfire and breaking glass. Windows shattered, horses broke free and galloped away in panic, and the night air filled with smoke. "We need to end this," Thorne said, checking his ammunition, "before the whole town burns down." Bell nodded grimly. "Roberts is the key. He's the only one who can prove Harrison's full involvement. We need him alive." As if on cue, Roberts appeared at the bottom of the stairs, making a desperate run for a nearby alley. Thorne moved without hesitation, leaving Bell behind the water trough as he gave chase. The pursuit led them through the smoke-filled streets, past running civilians and fleeing gang members. Roberts was quick, but panic made him sloppy. He took a wrong turn into a dead-end alley, spinning around to face Thorne with wild eyes. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Roberts gasped, his gun still trembling in his hand. "Harrison promised me we'd bring civilization to this territory. Real civilization, not this endless cycle of violence." "And how many people had to die for this civilization of yours, Thorne asked, his own weapon steady. Behind him, the sounds of gunfire were dying down as the marshals gained control of the situation. Robert's face twisted into a bitter smile. "Fewer, then we'll die without it. You'll see, Thorne. The territory needs men like Harrison, men who understand that sometimes you have to sacrifice the few to save the many." "No," Thorne replied quietly. "The territory needs justice. Real justice, not whatever twisted version you and Harrison cooked up." The sound of approaching footsteps made Roberts twitch. Belle appeared beside Thorne, her derringer aimed steadily. "It's over, Roberts. Morrison's men are surrendering. Blackwood's crew is cornered at the livery stable. Don't make this worse than it already is." Robert's eyes darted between Thorne and Belle, his gun hand shaking visibly now. The alley had grown quiet, the sounds of gunfire from the street reduced to sporadic shots and shouting. Smoke drifted between the buildings, carrying the acrid smell of gunpowder and burning wood. "You don't understand," Roberts said, his voice cracking. "Everything I did, everything Harrison planned, it was for the greater good. The territory's drowning in lawlessness, and men like Hawkins and Blackwood are just symptoms of a deeper disease. And your cure was worse than the disease," Belle replied, her derringer unwavering. "How many innocent people died because of the information you fed to both gangs? How many families lost everything because of Harrison's schemes?" Thorne took a step forward, his movement careful and measured. "Put the gun down, Roberts. There's been enough bloodshed tonight." For a moment, it seemed like Roberts might comply. His gun lowered slightly, his shoulders sagging with the weight of defeat. Then a new voice echoed from the entrance of the alley. "I couldn't agree more, Mr. Thorne." Victor Blackwood emerged from the smoke like a ghost, his elegant suit now dusty and torn, but his demeanor as composed as ever. Two of his men flanked him, their rifles trained on the group in the alley. "I must admit," Blackwood continued, brushing dust from his sleeve, "this evening has been full of surprises. Pinkerton agents, corrupted judges, betrayals within betrayals." He smiled thinly. "But I'm afraid we're not quite finished yet." Belle's derringer shifted slightly, trying to cover both Roberts and Blackwood. "It's over, Victor. Your men are surrounded. Morrison's crew is surrendering. There's no play left." "There's always a play, my dear," Blackwood replied. "For instance, did you really think I wouldn't have men watching Judge Harrison? That I wouldn't know about his arrest the moment it happened?" His smile widened. "Or that I wouldn't have contingencies in place for exactly this situation?" The sound of more footsteps approached from behind them. Thorne didn't need to turn around to know they were now trapped in the alley. "You see," Blackwood continued, "while everyone was focused on Harrison's schemes and the gold shipment, nobody thought to ask where all that money was really going. The judge wasn't just lining his pockets, he was funding something much bigger, something that will reshape the entire territory." Roberts's face had gone pale. "You knew?" All along you knew? Of course I knew, you fool, Blackwood scoffed. Who do you think suggested you to Harrison in the first place? Why do you think I let him think he was manipulating both gangs? He straightened his cuffs, the gesture incongruously elegant amid the chaos. Morrison and his crew were useful idiots, but you were the perfect tool. A disgruntled Pinkerton agent, bitter about the agency's methods, eager to help bring real civilization to the territory. Thorne's mind raced, pieces falling into place. The gold shipments, the gang warfare, it was all a distraction. What's the real play, Blackwood? Revolution, Mr. Thorne, Blackwood replied simply. The territory's ripe for it. All it needs is the right push. Harrison thought too small. He wanted control of a few counties. I'm going to take the whole territory. Bell's laugh was sharp in the smoky air. With what army? Look around you, my dear. Blackwood gestured to his men. These aren't common thugs like Morrison's crew. They're former Confederate officers, Mexican war veterans, trained soldiers waiting for a chance to build something new. The gang was just a cover, a way to gather resources and men without drawing attention. Robert's gun hand had steadied, but now it swung between Blackwood and Thorne, uncertainty plain on his face. You used me. Used Harrison. I gave you exactly what you wanted, Blackwood corrected. A chance to bring order to chaos. I just had a grander vision of what that order should look like. He sighed theatrically. And now, thanks to our friends here, we'll have to accelerate our timeline. The sound of gunfire erupted again from the direction of the main street, but this time it was different. More organized, more military. Ah, Blackwood smiled. Right on schedule. That would be the rest of my men arriving. I'm afraid the marshals are about to have their hands full. He turned his attention back to Thorne and Bell. Now we can do this the easy way, or... The rest of his words were cut off by a new sound, thundering hooves approaching rapidly from the south end of town. Blackwood's smile faltered for the first time. Didn't expect reinforcements so soon, did you? Thorne asked quietly. Bell wasn't the only one with a backup plan. The thundering hooves grew louder as a full company of cavalry burst into Shadowrock, their uniforms illuminated by the fires that had broken out during the gunfight. Blackwood's composed demeanor cracked for the first time as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. The army? He spat the words like a curse. You brought the damn army into this? Not just the army, Thorne replied calmly. When Bell and I discovered the scale of your operation, we knew local law enforcement wouldn't be enough. That cavalry unit's been shadowing us for days, waiting for your men to show their hand. Roberts began laughing, a hollow, broken sound that echoed off the alley walls. All this time I thought I was part of something bigger, something meaningful, but I was just another pawn in your game, wasn't I, Victor? We were all pawns, Bell said, her derringer still steady. The difference is, some of us figured it out sooner than others. The sounds of fighting intensified as Blackwood's hidden forces engaged with the cavalry, but these weren't the disciplined volleys of before. This was the chaotic firing of men caught by surprise, their careful plans unraveling. It's not over, Blackwood snarled, his aristocratic facade crumbling. My men are still in position throughout the territory, sleeper cells waiting for my signal. Even if you take Shadowrock, you can't stop what's coming. Already taken care of, Thorne replied. While you were focused on the gold shipment, federal marshals were rounding up your associates in every major town from here to Tucson. Harrison's confession gave us everything we needed. Names, locations, supply caches. Bell smiled grimly. Did you really think he wouldn't talk? The judge might have believed in your cause, Victor, but he believed in saving his own skin more. The alley erupted in sudden violence as Roberts made his move, swinging his gun toward Blackwood. But the former Confederate commander was faster, his own weapon seemingly materializing in his hand. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Roberts fell, clutching his chest, while Blackwood staggered back, blood spreading across his immaculate vest where Bell's derringer had found its mark. His men moved to assist him, but Thorne's revolvers kept them at bay. Funny thing about revolution, Thorne said quietly, watching as Blackwood slumped against the alley wall. Everyone always thinks they're going to be the one to control it. but in the end, it usually controls them. The cavalry had reached their position, dismounted troopers securing the alley from both ends. Blackwood's remaining men, seeing their leader fallen and their plans in ruins, finally lowered their weapons. As soldiers moved in to take control of the scene, Bell knelt beside Roberts, who was breathing shallowly, his life seeping into the dusty ground. "For what it's worth," he gasped, "I really did believe we were making things better." "I know," she replied softly. "That's what made you dangerous." Roberts managed a weak smile. "Tell the agency, tell them I'm sorry." His eyes closed for the last time. The weight of his betrayal finally lifted. Dawn was breaking over Shadow Rock as Thorne and Bell walked down the main street, surveying the aftermath. The fires were being contained, the wounded tended to, prisoners secured. Morrison had survived his wound and was already providing testimony about Blackwood's operation in exchange for leniency. "Hard to believe it's over," Bell said, watching as soldiers escorted the last of Blackwood's men toward waiting wagons. "Almost a year of investigation, tracking Harrison's corruption, following the gold shipments. Is it over?" Thorne asked quietly. "Men like Blackwood, they're like seeds in the desert. They wait for the right conditions, then bloom when you least expect it." Bell turned to face him, her expression serious. "That's why we'll keep watching, keep fighting, it's what we do." Thorne nodded, then surprised her with a slight smile. "Speaking of what we do, that story about being sent to find me, want to tell me the truth about that now?" "Maybe someday," she replied with a mysterious smile of her own. "Over a drink at Miller's place, if it's still standing." "Looking forward to it," Thorne said, checking his guns before holstering them for what he hoped would be the last time that day. "But right now we've got reports to file, testimony to take, and a territory to keep safe." As they walked toward the sheriff's office, the rising sun painted Shadow Rock in shades of gold and promise. The town had survived its darkest night, and though scars would remain, there was hope in the morning air. Sometimes, Thorne reflected, that's all any place really needs: hope, and people willing to fight for it. The story of the quiet stranger who faced down two gangs would be told in saloons across the territory for years to come. But the real story, of corruption, revolution, and redemption, would remain known only to a few, and perhaps that was for the best. After all, the most important victories are often the ones that history never records. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.